Thank you for your attendance, and I would like to formally say to Peter, welcome home, Peter. It's a great honour and privilege to be able to speak to you about your wonderful new novel. We have a lot to talk about, but I went on the internet yesterday and I actually beat Peter to it. I think he only called up a copy of this today. But there's been a wonderful review of one of many reviews in the New York Review of Books, their latest issue, by Kathleen Shine. And it's so beautifully written and so accurate and so good that I thought I would read you the first paragraph. His illegal self is a little book in the way that raspberries or bees or nuggets of uranium are little. It is shorter than Peter Carey's best-known books, Oscar and Lucinda and True History of the Kelly Gang, both of which are epics of almost uncanny originality set in the 19th century, and both of which won the Booker Prize. The new novel takes place in the more recent past, the early 70s, and unlike much of Carey's previous work, which is exhilarating in its scope, his illegal self is exhilarating partly because the depth of field has narrowed so dramatically. Reading this novel, Carey's 10th, is like peering at the human heart, at the world itself, through the distorted precision of a magnifying glass, one carried in the pocket of a 7-year-old boy. I think that's a beautiful introduction to the novel itself, to Che, the young boy with the magnifying glass in the pocket, our primary protagonist, along with his mother figure, Dial. It's another great novel, Peter. It's a beautiful novel, great piece of work, and surprising and daring, even by your own lofty standards. And I was thinking of a really corny way to link Peter with Adelaide as I was flying in, and then I thought, well, the Bradman Oval's over there, and if we looked at Bradman's average at the end of his career, it was pretty damn high, and I think if Peter was a cricketer, he doesn't look like a cricketer, but if Peter was a cricketer, he'd have a very high average book by book.
I'm probably the only person in history that got a leg by from his ear.
Thanks for that, Peter. There goes my analogy. I don't want to speak much, but I want to give you a brief introduction to the novel so you know, if you haven't come to this beautiful novel, you will know what we're talking about as we progress through our 45 minutes, I think 10 or 15 at the end of which you will have an opportunity to ask questions. But as you know, the book is set in the early 70s. Che Selkirk is a 7-year-old boy living with his very New York grandmother, a Park Avenue dame, protecting him from the dangers and evils of the flower power generation. His parents, Che's parents, Susan and David, are famous student radicals and American revolutionaries at that time living underground. And Che is told by a teenage friend in a neighbouring apartment that one day his folks will come and liberate him, will come for him. And a woman does appear, a woman by the name of Dial, who wears, and I quote, Hindu necklaces, little silver bells around her ankles, an angel sent by God. Che is convinced it is his mother, and the pair slip into the New York subway system and effectively become fugitives. And their journey ultimately takes them across the United States to Sydney, to Brisbane, and then to an alternative community in Yandina on the Sunshine Coast. Then in the 70s, I guess, the end of the world, and some would probably say today the end of the world. But it's a journey that begins in Bloomingdale's and ends at the most primitive outpost of civilization, and as the book states about Nambour, a bad dream on the dark side of the earth. This may be doing
to the Prime Minister.
That quote may be doing Nambour an injustice, but I'm doing the book an injustice by sort of doing this geographical summarising so briefly. But in my view as a reader, the book is about, as the New York Review of Books says, it's about the human heart, and one of the most magnificent strands of the novel, the bedrock of the novel, is how Peter writes about Che, the 7-year-old, and how his relationship with the world and his mother develops, that very first primal relationship. So, Peter, you've repeated this story before, but tell us, you lived in an alternative community in Yandina. Tell us about the origin of the story, because it's a fascinating one.
Yeah, it's... I lived in Yandina about 30 years ago. And during the time I lived there, and what for me, apart from the Bielke-Peterson police, who were truly terrifying, it was like living in paradise, and in a really wonderful community of people who gave you the great honour of never asking you what you did. And so into this environment, one day arrived this young American guy who I think came from Texas, but I can't remember, and he was like everybody else. We were happy he was there. He bought and began to repair an abandoned part of the community, and the first hint we had that he really had no idea on earth where he was when he started to plant little marijuana plants in his driveway. And where we sort of had to say, well, this is really not a very cool thing to be doing, and please don't do that. And so he didn't. But it was interesting to me to think about it, and even then, before I really knew a little bit about his story, I thought, this guy thinks he has come to the end of the earth. And because from his point of view he had, but he did not know where he was. Very interesting to me. And I remembered it for a long, long time. And I remembered it not just for that reason, but because sometime after he'd lived there, and maybe it was 6 months or a year, I can no longer really remember, or more, we were used to the police, of course, who on my first morning in Yandina turned up and said, well, you know, what's your name and date and place of birth? And so I gave him a bit of that information, but was reluctant to give more. And they said, listen, Peter, you know, you're in Queensland now. We don't need a warrant to search this place, because we've got the Queensland Health Act, and we'll find something, don't you worry. Now, what's your date and place of birth? So the police sort of were like that, but on this particular morning, when involving our American friend, they didn't just come with cars or trucks, they came with helicopters. And it was sort of like very early in the morning disturbing an ant's nest and people running through the bush. Okay, and but they were after our American friend, who, to cut a long story short, was, it turned out, wanted for conspiracy to import cocaine from Mexico into the United States. And there was a brief period when we were... they didn't actually get him because he was in hospital in Nambour getting his gallbladder taken out. And there was a policeman in the room, and he wanted to tell us something. And so we were all too frightened to go near him. But one member of the community did go near him and sat in the room, and where he managed to communicate that he wanted us to call a lawyer in Texas to find out if he should tell the Queensland police his real name. And so we set off with jam jars full of 20-cent pieces to go into the most mountainous parts of the, you know, the little red phone boxes up on those green ridges, and where we tried to ring the United States, but discovered that you can't do that with 20-cent pieces, and so we had to head off into the dark heart of Brisbane, right around from the police headquarters, which was teeming with police and so on. So it was sort of dreadful, but also funny and all sorts of. So that. None of this is the 20-cent pieces are in the book, but really not much else at all. A sense of this place, but not a place like that place. And when I thought about it, I started off not really knowing what my book is, and that's the fun of writing a novel, to have some ideas, have some feelings, think this is, you know, an interesting site of inquiry. And I began, and I saw this couple, like one of those hippie mothers we used to see trudging along the roads in Queensland, heading from this creek to that festival, and with always a little boy clinging very tight to the mother on the side, the little 6, 7, 8, 10-year-old boys who fiercely protective of their mothers. The great disappointment for all the young men who were interested in the mothers, because the little boys were very good at keeping them away. And if you know the Bruce Highway going out of Brisbane, and I just imagine this couple hitchhiking along there, and there's a big tropical storm coming. All the cars are coming out of Noosa and all of those places with their lights on in the middle of the day. And here's this couple heading north, not knowing where they are, but on the run. But not on the run because there are drugs involved, but on the run because they have connections with people in the weather underground, and they're wanted by the FBI through a whole series of misunderstandings. And so that's where it all starts. The result of this, and I promised you long answers, and the result of this, of course, is that having avoided writing American characters after 18 years because I was sort of terrified. I mean, I think my American friends, you know, they're born there, they can do that naturally, and I didn't think I ever should, but I had no choice. So I had to confront the business of having American characters. And at first I just thought I will do it through the point of view of the little boy, because he's just a child, and so if he's wrong, he's just a kid. That's it. And so that seemed like a really good way to do it, and also it was interesting in terms of what you could do with misunderstanding about where you were, and interesting in terms of what you could push for in language. But in the end, I did that really nicely, but it was really dull. It was very appallingly dull, and in the end, it became apparent that I needed the woman's point of view, so we knew what was at stake. And having got that far into the book, I really stopped worrying about who was American or who was what, because the book itself and the forces of the drama take over. And now, finally, and it's really tough to, I mean, I was worried about writing about people in Sydney when I was from Melbourne, you know, and so one of the things I'm most proud about in the book is, I think what we should do as novelists is be prepared to be other than what we are, and that's what novelists have to do all the time. But it's quite hard to jump in that particular way. So,
I mean, in the commune, though, you, like the way you were a talented cricketer, you got your hands dirty, didn't you? You were sort of building huts and...
In real life.
You became a primitive man then, in real life, yes.
A manly man.
That's right, a manly man.
Yes, I did. That wasn't funny. Adelaide's tough, isn't it? I do remember. Yeah, it was one of the great thrills of the place, really. You set up there and you find yourself in this hut, which wasn't really my idea, I might add. But anyway, for various personal reasons, I ended up there, and I think, oh my God, you know, the first thing I need is a workbench. And so I go and buy this hardwood, and I had 4x4 hardwood legs. And so I spent 2 days sitting down there with the saw, just figuring out how to be able to cut the hardwood to make the bench so that the saw sawed straight. So there were lots of things like that, but I mean, that were outside my previous experience, but which were really sort of wonderful. And the thing about the book, of course, is that these two characters, the little boy from Park Avenue in New York, and the woman who's a scholarship girl from South Boston, who's gone on to Harvard and they arrive at Browns Creek, Yandina, which I love, but of course they hate it. And you know, it's dirty, and there are flies, and there are things that bite you. And one of the results of that is the way the book gets read often in the United States by people who don't have our affection for that sort of environment. As I say, oh my God, that place. And I have to spend all my time telling them what a beautiful place it was. And one of the great pleasures for me of actually writing this book is that you can sit in downtown New York with all the ambulances going down Broadway and be inhabiting Browns Creek, Yandina in 1970, and imagining this little Peter bird rustling in the floor of the rainforest. And it makes me really happy to do that. But when you finish doing that for the morning and you go out to meet other people and go on with other things, there's no way you can communicate to them where you've been and what it feels like and how happy it makes you feel to do that. Anyway, my characters were not happy there at first.
We know from stories about you with Kelly Gang that you did some field trips through Victoria, but did you revisit Yandina entirely from the standpoint of your imagination, or were there some trips snuck in?
I think snuck. Snuck is a good word. Really, we sort of... well, I had to go. I had to go to Noosa Heads to work, basically. All right. So it was really important, I thought, that I visited that part of the earth again. And but actually, when I went out, snuck out from Noosa Heads, and got closer towards Yandina, and the ginger factory wasn't even there when I was there. There's all this crap, really, and I actually didn't want to see it, and then I realised that what I had in my imagination was actually way more vivid, and there are sort of really simple things about just change and time. I mean, the sugar crop, which was such an important visual part of that landscape, is now not subsidised, probably, and I guess we should be very pleased that there's less sugar and less pesticides and nitrates pouring into the rivers, but it's not as pretty without it. So I just sort of went back to Noosa and had all this stuff in my head from 30 years before.
I'm glad you didn't stay long. I think that policeman that roughed you up on your first day all those years ago is now the commissioner, but I'm interested in you sitting in Manhattan and visiting the rainforest and the ants every day. I'm also interested in Che's journey from an apartment in New York to the end of the earth. And I know you'll correct me if I'm over-reading this, but it echoes to me of little Peter Carey's journey from Bacchus Marsh to a boarding school in Melbourne. I mean, it could be that, or it could be the reverse of Peter Carey, the man and the writer, settling in an apartment in New York, having come from the bottom of the world.
I'll correct you.
Thank you.
Just take it as a correction. I mean, but you're not wrong to say it could be read as, in the sense that, no matter how controlling and obsessive writers are, the great wonder and mystery of it all is that we cannot control you. And we might like to, and we might like to think that we might like to, but we really can't. And the great wonder of just reading books generally and of literature generally is that every one of you, when you read, bring your whole life and all of that very particular imagination that none of us are privy to see into, and you sort of plug it into the book and reach some agreement with it and build something together. And so then all sorts of things, magic and mysterious things that the writer could not predict or could not know or could not expect, happen in that gorgeous private moment of being alone with a book. And I used to, when I was a much younger writer, sort of read reviews and read people's things, think that I was saying this or saying that, and I think, look at the morons, they. But as I've got a little bit older and a little more mature, I understand this is the glory of reading, and so yes, you can see it that way. I wouldn't see it that way, and I don't think that I mean, it works very well, but I think the roots why I did this is really, I mean, it's contained in the notion of that image of the mother and the child, and on that road, the Bruce Highway, just north of, for those of you who remember that Golden Fleece service station that used to be there before the Caboolture turn off, just there.
I'd love to see a show of hands on that question.
We've got some. There we go. The National Trust overlooked that service station, I think. So
is there, though, behind this serious discussion, is there too much of an insistence on wanting to connect, certainly the writer's life with the writer's work? I mean, you have, dare I say it, suffered from this sort of a constant attempt to connect your real life with your imaginary work and the deliverance of your art. I mean, are we too insistent upon that?
Well, some people are, and in some places they are. I mean, I think the huge joy of what I do, and the image of the mother and the child and the road and the storm and beginning that way and finding things out in that way, illustrates sort of really how I begin to think. I'm really bored with writing about myself, but if I was going to write about myself, I wouldn't be cowardly about it. I mean, I wouldn't really need... I mean, novelists are not cowardly journalists who are frightened to say, what really happened, and so therefore they've got to cloak their life in some sort of disguise of some sort. It's not what I do, and it's not... The glory of writing fiction is really to invent and enter into worlds that you've not personally experienced. There's no one in this book I know. And when you start off with that image and you're figuring out what it means, and you come out 2 years later and you've made something, and you've discovered things you did not know before. And what my real aim is the thing that makes me excited about writing literature is to make something new and beautiful that never existed before. And every day, this is what I do. So if you do this for 2 years and to pick on Matt's very polite and tentative question about the boy going to John Grammar, if it gets reduced to that, then I might as well have never done anything. He's a good guy. I mean, it's not...